Palmyra, we just found out that the three columns were blown up with people attached to it, and there's so much destruction all over. But how do you sense what's going on there in Iraq, in the Kurdish part of Iraq? Everything is becoming unsettled, and certainly with the insinuation of the Russians into the battlefield there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complex situation, of course, with so many different groups, and also the superpowers now having, involvement in that region. On the one end you have, you have Assad, and whoever backs Assad, being Iran and obviously Russia, including another terrorist group, Hezbollah out of Lebanon,
right.
Also in that region. And then on the other side you got ISIS, and the other side you got the Kurds, and whoever's arming the rebel groups, being the U.S., and then you have Turkey also involvement. So it's a real recipe for disaster, really. So it's a very complex situation, and trying to find out what exactly whose agenda is quite a minefield to try and decipher.
Well, certainly Iran has got a tremendous amount of influence in the area. I thought the French were going to make a big impression when they decided to send in planes into the battlefield, but they seem to have lost all their juice with Russia coming into the mix. So their old, influence is seemingly dissipated as within weeks. But interesting, at the end of the day, when we look at the entire complexity of it all, what is the essence of the fight? What are we fighting for? Is it pipelines? Is it oil? What's going on?
Yeah, you see, that's trying to decipher the real agenda is, again, quite difficult getting to the bottom of it. I mean, I think it's partly it's control of that segment of the region, having Syria and Iran as neighbors and keeping that relationship and that little strength in the region, and having Russia back that up. Mm-hmm. Then it's obviously the scary ultra-violent tactics of ISIS, which is really a massive psyops. They've really utilized the internet and the media to galvanize their followers, as well as spread their message. But trying to decipher the real what the real fight is over it could be numerous things, whether it be control in that region, keeping a footprint in that region, when it comes to obviously as always the talk about oil and minerals and stuff like that is always a talk, but I think it's less now than it was originally with Iraq. And now it's just trying to somehow stay in that region, keep a footprint there, while others are trying to make sure that this caliphate doesn't grow any further, and what is the real agenda regarding that. So it really is incredibly difficult to decipher when you have so many different segments and influences in that region. It's very difficult getting to the bottom of it.
So, Mr. Schiena, in a sense, what you're really saying is every actor, every protagonist in that region has a perspective. So you'll have a Turkish perspective, a Russian perspective, a U.S. A perspective from the Christian communities. They're being decimated, almost in a sense like a genocidal war against them. And the Egyptians have a say that maybe, interestingly enough, it seems, and Jordan, of course, and Iraq and Iran, Saudi Arabia, we're fighting on so many fronts. I don't even know who's doing what, and it looks like Turkey might be imploding. They're fighting both Assad, and because they don't want him to hang around, they don't want a Kurdish state, rising up. where does America sit on all this? Do we even know?
Well, again, it was the supply and funding of rebel groups that were anti-Assad, and I think in the beginning that became the problem. Is funding groups that we've seen in history before is funding the wrong groups that then become part of terrorist elements and allow that element to grow in the region. So from a kind of advise and assist kind of perspective, the involvement's becoming greater and greater, where you've seen, Delta Force alongside the Kurds going on the hostage rescue. Obviously, the use of chemical weapons is another justification for further involvement, and should actually, be a reason for further involvement. I was in Iraq at that time. And, the use of mustard gas on the border against the Kurds, was something that was not, fully believed or acknowledged, where, I saw it firsthand, and I saw the devices, and I saw the victims of the mustard gas attacks. So, it's just that it's escalating, and the reasons for being there are multiple now. And that'll increase U.S. involvement in there, especially since it's gone from advise and assist, and now it was alongside the Kurdish commando strike on an ISIS prison. Yeah.
I do. I'm wondering, there, I was reading in the French press that all of a sudden, Iran has recognized that some of its soldiers are being killed in the fight, to bolster up President Assad. And what's interesting is that the assertion or the intimation by the French press is that there's really a concern about that. Is there concern? Will Iran back down? Or will they continue to be engaged very heavily in protecting, as far as I believe that they're concerned, Assad is important to their control in the region, their influence.
Yeah, with that, correct. With that shared border, there's no way Iran will back down in this. In anything, they were the first ones, obviously, to come to Assad's assistance with supplies, etc., against the rebel groups. That'll only increase. You have that axis there. You have, Iran, Russia, Hezbollah, and Assad. And what's unclear is really, what is the greatest enemy? Is the greatest enemy ISIS, or is it, Assad in the eyes of the U.S. and other forces? Like, who is the greatest enemy? And first it was arming rebel groups that were anti-Assad, or finding ones who were moderate, who were more anti-Assad and anti-ISIS, and then it was really just looking at anti-ISIS rebel groups and then anti-Assad groups. So who's the biggest evil in that region, really? Then they question, what did Assad actually use as sarin? Was it a false flag attack, which is the normal questions that come up in these kind of situations. So it's really, that is another huge issue, is again, arming, assisting the correct rebel groups. But this question now is, which one is which is the greater evil? Do we go anti-Assad or anti-ISIS, because you can't seem to find or assist and equip ones that are anti both those groups?
Well, I find it really difficult also to understand. There's a large Christian community in the western part along the Syrian Mediterranean border, and they're being decimated, and yet at the same time they are very supportive of President Assad, because they believe that he's protected them and kept the peace between Christians and Muslims. For that section of Syria, does it look likely that Syria might be partitioned, and that Alawite region will become the last stronghold for Mr. Assad? And will America side with one religious group or the other? Should one also do that? I don't know.
I don't think America can afford to make the distinction just purely on the basis of religion, and you know, now with obviously the Sunni Shiite struggle, which really goes back to thousands of years ago,
right?
It's just a continuation again. It's almost like a throwback to 13th century and Genghis Khan coming to the region and hacking off heads and having his reputation precede him. It's kind of reminiscent of that, and the destruction of religious places of worship. That is, Genghis Khan did that, and ISIS is doing it now, and this is 800 years later. And that struggle between Muslim killing Muslim, Muslim killing Christian, and vice versa. It's just a continuation. Often it's are we worse than the Dark Ages? I mean, it's just another time in history that this has come about again. It's another repetition of it. Whether it's going to be a partitioning of Iraq, I'm not sure, but I don't think there will be a decision by the U.S. based on religion. I think it will be based on however peace can be established right now. I think the most important thing is that it's not whatever the original agendas may have been, whatever is the agenda of the caliphate or whoever's promoted and helped it. I think it's kind of changed to a point where it's you need stability there. You have the world superpowers, which have always been at odds. More recent history, with Russia's initial invasion of Afghanistan and getting, not allowing that again. It's stability. That's what's, I think, of ultimate importance. And maybe seeing ISIS in the beginning may not have been, that much of a threat, but I don't think anyone predicted that they would grow the way they did and become a real force.
What's interesting is
addressing that.
Well, it's so interesting that actually reports are only recently coming out, even though there were other media around the world that had mentioned it. ISIS is taking in, I think it was like $50 million a day, selling oil, and that's all permitted. And so I guess it's a necessary part of that evil. There seems this accommodation, and yet we found out today that oil prices just dropped further, and the Saudis are not going to bolster it. They're going to let oil find its own equilibrium as far as the market dictates. Is this another aspect of the fight against ISIS?
Yeah, funding mechanisms are always, vital importance to any terrorist organization, and it's always the old adage of finding the money. This time they control the resource, when they have these certain oil mines and that, but it's, how and where is this oil being sold? How is it being monetized, and other parts to their funding mechanism, that need to be cut off. Now, who actually, assists, ISIS in that is participant in that, and there are forces in the region that are allowing, their borders to be accessed by ISIS, and therefore, that's a way for that oil or other funding mechanisms to operate. Cutting that off is obviously, of importance.
I've got to ask you, since you've been there on the ground in so many different aspects of the region, do you get a sense of why, for example, let's say Saudi Arabia, who have the capacity to actually accept people from the entire Middle East in their nation, they've got tents that are really quite plush in consideration to be able to accommodate 3 million people, why have they not become involved? Are they afraid of repercussion? Are they concerned?
The Saudis are heavily involved, obviously, in the funding mechanisms, not of ISIS, but
Correct.
Of the whichever Sunni rebel groups there are, and that's obviously tied into their religious beliefs and ideology,
right.
and their own religious system. But the funding is what they have been most active on from the very beginning, and it's the UAE and other Arab states in the region are also part of that, but the Saudis taking the lead in that, and I think that's where they're leaving that. I mean, I had an issue on the ISIS front lines, in support of the Kurds, because they were being hit with chemical weapons, with mustard gas, and they had no gas masks.
Correct.
Now, my easiest, quickest solution to that, and the only reason I reacted on that was in a purely, operator standpoint, where you're on the front lines and you're the only group fighting ISIS, and you're getting hit with chemical weapons and you have no gas masks. It's a very fundamental thing, and the quickest way to remedy that was with the Jordanians, and even through obviously there are other nations like the U.S. and others that would come to assistance, but often bureaucracy takes time, and I needed that done very, very quickly. And Prince Ali of Jordan immediately spoke to King Abdullah and got the gas masks signed off and ordered to deliver them. So there are other allies in that region that are very active and proactive, and are becoming more and more active in this fight. But when it comes to Saudi's involvement, I think they keep it quite monetarily and seem to always have, right? The funding of the groups that are going to, aid their, agenda also.
Should America be concerned that maybe with, I think there are, over 1.5 million people who fled Syria that are now in Jordan, and that population is so huge and a major burden, and financially and with respect to resources as well. Should we be concerned about the capacity of King Abdullah II to survive?
I mean, I don't think it's something for really America to be concerned of directly. I mean, there are greater concerns and concerns that are more pressing at the moment, which really top of that is, Russia and America's relationship in the region, and and friendly fire issues, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think Jordan has the capacity, and King Abdullah has the capacity to handle that migrant crisis, just like Europe is scrambling to, handle its migrant crisis. But I think there are things that are more important for the U.S. to look at.
And what about the migrant crisis in Europe with such an influx of so many people? Is that going to actually cause the disintegration of this unified continent of nations? Will because it seems to be breaking up on particularly national lines. Hungary says one thing, the Poles say another, the Germans say another. Sweden is getting all upset. You have right-leaning governments that are very concerned about the influx of new immigrants. Should we be concerned about that as well?
I don't think that Europe would cause Europe's agreements, the unified Europe, to break up. But in the end, you never know these days. So many crazy things that are unexpected seem to be happening. I don't personally see that happening anytime soon, but it may contribute to a disintegration of those agreements, of that unification. But the migrant crisis, whether it's the migrants in Jordan or Europe, this is just another byproduct of not handling that region of Iraq and Syria correctly. It's just these are further consequences that are just becoming more and more difficult to handle because the initial situation, the initial problem wasn't handled effectively.
Yeah. Does it look, Mr. Schiena, does it look as though there will be a like a phoenix rising, that there will be a Kurdistan? I understand that there's the Kurds are certainly in parts of eastern Turkey and in parts of Syria, and as well as in Iraq, and even small sliver in Iran. Is it conceivable that there could be a nation that will rise from all these ashes?
I mean, Kurdistan could put it this way: KRG, Kurdistan Regional Government, has held its position. Right, the Peshmerga have not only held their current borders, but they pushed ISIS back. Right, hundreds of miles, and they were the only organized force against ISIS. Now they hold their position very strongly. I've spent time in their capital, Erbil, which is Erbil has a population of Christian, of Muslim, Shiite and Sunni, even the Jewish population, right? And they all live together, right? And they're all together in protecting Erbil and protecting Kurdistan, right, from ISIS. So, and it's a thriving city, and it's a frontier city against ISIS. So, that stability in itself, I think, it says a lot for that people and for the Peshmerga, who relentlessly fight ISIS with very low resources. Right. You see a lot of the aid from the U.S. and other countries go to Baghdad, go to the Iraqis, but the time it reaches the Kurds, it's not the original product. You'll have a armored vehicle, say, destined for Baghdad. By the time it gets to the Kurds, that armor's been removed, because that is the next conflict being between the Iraqis and the Kurds. And if you take ISIS out of that equation, that's who will go to war. And, the Iraqis will want Kirkuk back, and the Kurds will not allow that. So that Phoenix may be possible purely on the basis of the stability of the Kurds and their ability to live among each other and be a united front against ISIS.
Wow, so complex. Do you get a sense that people in America have an awareness, or do their eyes glaze over by the atrocities that happen seemingly every day and the enormity of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's ISIS is very effective in their psyops, right? They've really utilized the internet. That is all that people see. They're horrified by that, but understanding the complexity of that region and what could potentially happen if it's not controlled, if it's not handled effectively, understanding Russia-America presence, understanding, Hezbollah, Iran, all these little pieces, Turkey and Turkish intelligence involvement, et cetera, that is a minefield for most people to understand and comprehend. All we see in the public, continue.
Sorry, forgive me. All we see in the public is what?
All we see is what ISIS wants us to see, right? And, and often what any player wants us to see by utilizing the media. But what's actually happening and the complexity of that is a whole different story that you can't really access from the media. You really need to go much deeper. Yeah.
Well, you need the expertise of people like you who have an understanding, because you've been there and you also have access to different people, and you're able to distill all of this uh, to a great extent, certainly to much higher levels than someone sitting in the U.S. Who
Sure.
may just not even be there, doesn't even understand the language or the culture or the religion. So very, very difficult. Wanted to ask you about one of the biggest gorillas, in a sense, that's there, but we don't talk about it, or is that just like on the back burner until the rest of the Middle East gets to it? And that is Israel. Is that going to be the next big battle in the next few months as things resolve to some extent, even if not securely, in Syria? Through Hezbollah and other surrogates that way.
Yeah, I mean, look, that region is in turmoil now, right? With Hezbollah also being in Syria now, obviously that threat kind of increases, for Israel. What that next war or conflict is going to be, yes, there's potential, but I don't see what's currently happening resolving itself anytime soon.
No.
Not at all, not by a long shot. This is at least a 10 to 20-year event. It may become a byproduct of it or a secondary war, but this is the one that's really the total focus and is going to take a lot of time to try and remedy, if ever. It's a monster that's been awoken and allowed. And now it needs to be contained, and it's not that easy because you got so many different groups, so many different players in the region, and proxy wars, and it becomes very, very difficult because it's not just remove the caliphate. It's there's Assad in Russia, and there's the U.S. funding these groups, and it's very, very complex and difficult.
Is Russia concerned about the influence of ISIS also along the Middle Eastern border, because they have so many people in their, I guess, a very vulnerable underbelly who also subscribe to different aspects of Islam? Are they worried about that, like a resurgence in the Chechnya or in Kazakhstan, or all places like that?
Sure. I mean, they're also worried about possible extremism within their own borders. That should be part of the reason they descended on Syria. Whether it's questioning whether the anti-Assad rebels are being hit by their fighter planes or actual ISIS is a different story, or both. But ISIS is definitely a threat for them also, and definitely part of the reason of them being in that region. Besides obviously backing up Assad, and as an ally. So. Yeah.
My God, you're so well versed on these issues. Barely touch on any one aspect of it, and it's such a grand panoply of political, I guess, disgruntlement and frustration all over. I don't know how you keep it all together, which is really fascinating. I hope you'll consider into the future, maybe, first of all, my apology of bringing in an aspect of the world that you didn't really focus on so much as more in the Middle East, which is, I guess, the center of the world at the moment, and may continue to be so, like you said, for 20 years. But maybe we could just focus on something a lot smaller into the future, if you feel comfortable, and maybe delve just on what's happening in Syria or the so-called Islamic Caliphate. And then also, why do we confuse everything? We had ISIS, we had ISIL, we had Daesh. We have, it gets tough to figure out what's what, and then now it's the IS.
Right.
Maybe that's
right.
the American way. I don't know.
Yeah, but Daesh is just the how it's addressed in the region.
Right.
If you say ISIS in the region, they don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
It's Daesh, but that's part of the what ISIS wanted to also put out there. I guess part of their, as they grew and got stronger, I guess they morphed into these different names or shortened their names, and it's quite amazing how they've utilized psychological operations. It's those tactics have really they've learned from experts in that field, and they've utilized it very effectively.
I didn't realize time literally has been exhausted. I hope to have you back again. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I appreciate it very, very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Be well, and thank you. Enjoy the week.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
There we have it, folks. We've got to go. I think we're running a little bit over, but we're still recording. So just enjoy, and we'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you so much. Bye.